Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and it's Lazerpig time once again. Yeah, so today's episode is sending a little bit contradictory messages to me, at least from the onset. It's called Something Something Tiger. The thumbnail obviously says, Get Wrecked Wereaboos, where, if you don't know, a wereaboo is somebody who, like, for lack of a better term, fanboys World War II German military stuff, like, to an absurd degree, to the point where they think that nothing is, like, better. But it has a tiger tank on a muscular body, so obviously this is a video about the tiger tank. Other than that, I have no idea what it's going to be about. Most likely it's talking about his history and his various faults and stuff like that. Like, for a fact that I know, the Churchill actually had thicker frontal armor than the Tiger. Who would have guessed? And last but not least, before the actual video starts, I'm going to have a card in the corner, which I forgot which one it would be from here, going to the Let's Play video that I'm going to be posting on the same day as this. Currently, it's going to be Deus Ex Human Revolution. I know it's a few years old, but I never actually got a chance to finish it, and I'm having a lot of fun actually playing through it fully for the first time. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get started with this, shall we? Oh, I love this. World of Tanks, of course. Couldn't get World of Worship, so I guess that would be slightly off topic.
For the grievous historical errors I am about to make in this video, I apologize. History is so often embroiled in fantasy and myth that untangling truth from fiction is rather like trying to move a rustling packet of meat-flavored snacks past an infinite amount of dogs. In theory, it can be done, but it does require a lot of time, patience, and the ability to resist the temptation to pet a dog. Now, thankfully, I am not immortal, and while I would love to do a video series that accurately depicts the entire Second World War as it happens, start to finish, dispelling every myth and misconception along the way, I have neither the remaining lifespan nor the mega yacht style funding required to undertake such a project.
Yeah.
So, while this video may limit itself to some of the more common misconceptions and not go into the more deep myths that so many people on the internet spend far too much time obsessing over, it is, to the best of the information and knowledge I have available to me at the time of recording, accurate. Of course, some people will inevitably believe otherwise and think that I'm wrong about everything. They do seem to get very, very angry about these sorts of things.
Read Wereaboo. But as a side note, I have both the Tiger... I mean, of course, it's just... Even if you don't play it that much, it's a fun-looking tank. I have it both in World of Tanks, and I literally just got it a couple of days ago in War Thunder, so... So,
as I charge towards you with my little rustling packet of facts, do be aware of the infinite tsunami of dogs behind me. Now that that's out of the way, allow me to introduce to you a very old friend and today's sponsor. Enjoy.
Thanks. Okay, where are you going with this Lazerpig? Okay.
He was just an ordinary American hero.
Honey, the apple pies are ready. Oh, and don't forget you got that bomb puller hold down later on.
Until the day
Why is that cow red?
everything changed.
Oh my God.
Terry, we need you.
No, sir. I'm a tank of pace now. My days of battling in over 40 graphically stunning arenas in a free-to-play tank-based combat game on PC with over 100 million players are over.
That's just it, Terry. They got your wife.
But, sir, I'm not even married.
You are now, son, to America.
No!
Join the adventure in open fields, deserts, steep hills, forests, and urban environments with over 600 tanks to choose from.
But, sir, tanks don't belong in the city.
We ain't got time for your technicalities, son. This is war, and the French, they're here.
My God.
Oh, no.
How do we stop them?
Meet your new partner, son.
A partner? No way, Sarge.
Who's
I
it
work
gonna be?
alone. That's what they all say. But when you grow up in generic small town with 27 brothers and no mom, you learn what it's like when your part is written by some old dude who has never left California. Looks like I underestimated you.
Feel the action. Feel the drama.
Oh, I remember
The
that.
suspense.
And tonight's winning lottery numbers are...
And the romance. Of world
No, you cannot do that with Tier Young tanks. These are lolly tanks. You can't do that.
tanks.
But how else am I supposed to tell them that you can earn experience through battles and upgrade and modify your tank?
Oh, you don't have to. With my new evil link in the description machine, anyone who registers now will receive 250,000 credits, 7 days of a premium account, and the premium tank Excelsior, which is just a Cromwell with extra armor, and they have one at the Tank Museum in Bovington. It's very pretty, and you should go see it.
You diabolical evil man!
But that's not all. They'll also get 3 Tier 6 rented tanks for 10 battles each, including the legendary Tiger 131.
You won't get away with your evil schemes this time.
Oh, but I already have.
Oh, the speed! The speed! Bang! Bang! Explosion!
Pow! Right in the kitchen!
Sorry, I had to pause for a second. Doom Turtle.
All my life, I've been a solo boy. But now we gotta make friends. The American way.
Think fast, Chuckle Nuts!
Right in the kisser!
I wish actual movies were this good.
World of Tanks. Rated T for tanks.
What do you think of my new shirt, hero?
Wait, are you just advertising World of Tanks' new merch line on Amazon?
Yes, I am, and there's nothing you can do to stop me.
I like how the T-3485 is the one with the British accent.
Arguably the most famous tank which ever existed, the German Second World War Tiger tank is a legend in its own right, and for good reason. No tank is more of a crowd pleaser at shows. No tank has children running and screaming at it from all angles, trying to touch it with their jammy fingers. No tank can sell tickets at events quite like it, and no tank has had such a devastating effect on the mythos of the Second World War as the Tiger. The 54-ton, 88mm equipped super tank, as many idiots tend to call it, has been the spear point of the romanticization, and some would say fetishization, of Nazi Germany for the past 70 years. Even during the Second World War, its reputation alone harbored a significant legend. Even if the idea of Tiger Panic is somewhat over-exaggerated, it was the only German tank every Allied soldier could name. It was the only tank many feared or were nervous about encountering, and it was the only German tank when captured was frontline news as opposed to just being thrown out on the scrap heap. The Tiger has been at the vanguard of every Weebatorian's wet dream. Discussions of the
Weebatorian.
godlike legends of German technology often start with the Tiger, and there are many people who still hold the belief that it could hold its own against the more modern tanks of the day. But of course,
those people are
something
idiots.
of a dying breed. Veribus are not frequently as common as they once were, and one has to shine a torch into some of the darkest, cringiest places on the internet to find them. Whereas, go back
5-10 years ago, and you'd find them infesting every World War II forum, discussion tab, or chat screen of any war-related game. And of course, I could sit here and I could tell you that no, the Tiger tank is not the be-all and end-all of all Second World War tank designs. No, it was never the most advanced tank or the most powerful of the war. No, it cannot 1v1 a modern tank and expect to win regardless of who is in the commander's seat. And no, it could not take on every allied tank with impunity. But of course, you already knew all of that. Today, of course, it's far more common to find historians, mainly forum posters and YouTubers, talking about how bad and overrated most German weapons of the Second World War actually were, and this channel is no exception to that.
Yeah.
We sit in the golden age of awakening, where the myths that had previously dominated the World War II fan club scene are finally being questioned, and the realization that German Second World War technology wasn't actually all that great, or even that advanced in comparison to what everyone else was doing, has been at the forefront of a new wave of understanding. And the Tiger tank is once again on the front lines as the various sides argue back and forth about the myth of the German Panzer Wonder Weapon versus its actual performance in reality.
Oh, geez, what happened to that one?
Where even die-hard Veribus have begun to consider Tiger tank love a little bit of a childish endeavor, and most have moved up the Tiger scale to the Panther or the Stug. Even to bust the myth of the Tiger tank these days is now commonly considered a low bar, the domain of clickbait websites, and not particularly viewed as a topic for serious discussion by serious people. Hello. My name's Lazerpig, currently not wanted for any serious goblin crimes in the state of Utah, and welcome to a serious discussion on the Tiger tank, and one we need to have, because so mired in the murky swamps of fable is the Tiger that not only is almost everything taught to the public about this tank a myth, the more common myths busted about this tank are in fact myths themselves, and the busting of those myths can in fact also be myths, so much so that I guarantee in a few hundred years historians looking back on the sheer level of contradictory information about the Tiger tank would probably come to the conclusion that the tank never existed and was probably a story told to allied tank commanders at bedtime to prevent them from misbehaving. Eat your greens or the Tiger will eat your feet. But first, a disclaimer. Hello, if you are one of the last remaining holdouts who fully believe in the legends of the Tiger tank, that its battle performance was legendary, hampered only by the few numbers it was available in, that someone like Michael Whitman sitting in his Tiger could take out an Abrams if given enough prep time, that it really did take 5 Shermans to take down 1 Tiger on average, then I really have to question why. For anyone to maintain this belief, they would either have to do absolutely no research at all, or get their knowledge of history exclusively from idiotic Veribus and the Hearts of Iron forums. And even then, the sheer fact you're searching for and watching historian YouTubers means you're either watching bad ones, like me, or you're sticking your fingers in your ears and going, la 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 la, I'm not listening, every time you hear something you don't like. So I hate to bust your bubble, but no, the Tiger was not all-powerful. Yes, it could comfortably take down most allied tanks from range, but itself was not invincible to return fire from any of them. A Sherman singular could take down a Tiger all by itself, and it
Yeah, because nothing is invincible. And you have the very fact that, as I said before, the Churchill had greater thick frontal armor than the Tiger 1, and it wasn't sloped. So you had the Sherman, whose armor was thinner, but it was sloped to a point where it was as thick as the almost vertical frontal plate. Although then again, I'm probably just spreading even more misinformation like he's talking about before. So I'll stop. Let's continue on, see what he has to say.
Happened many times. The myth that it took 5 Shermans to take down a Tiger comes from, the chieftain believes it's because of squad sizes. A Tiger shows up, you call for armored support, and 5 Shermans would show up, because Shermans operate in squads of 5. Which, that does make sense. I, however, believe it to be more of a misinterpretation of the data. In the Normandy campaign, Tigers regularly scored a 5-to-1 kill ratio, sometimes higher. The average for the entire war was 11-to-1. That is 11 tanks destroyed for every 1 lost Tiger, which, if you look at the data for losses recorded by both sides during the Normandy campaign, does seem fairly credible.
Again, wouldn't that just be because the Tigers were built in so few numbers that for literally, you had to go through 10 other tanks before you got to a Tiger to destroy?
Unless you were aware of how each side recorded tank losses, then you'd know that data is somewhat flawed.
The Brits, for example, would do a thing called the last light count, where at the end of the day, at the last light, they would count all their tanks and arrange them into 3 categories. Tanks that were fine, tanks that could be repaired in under 24 hours, and tanks that needed longer than 24 hours to repair, were damaged beyond repair, or destroyed, or were, for whatever reason, no longer with the unit. And that third category was called a write-off, and the tank would be stricken from the division's active list. The mistake being that many assume every tank written off was a destroyed tank, whereas it could equally mean one that was heavily damaged, or just had a specific part which broke that the division did not have any spares of, and thus needed to go back to the depot, to one that was transferred to another division, or had gotten lost or broken down somewhere else and was not with the division when the count was made. This is why Allied tank losses by sheer overall numbers seem so high, yet replacements seem to arrive so quickly, which is also the basis for the Great Allied Wave of Sherman's myth.
Of course.
Sometimes when a tank was sent back to the depot, it would take months before an engineer got the chance to look at it and decide if or not it was worth repairing, and if it wasn't, well, that is when they would consider the vehicle lost, which means that often the same vehicle would then be counted again in Allied vehicle loss stats. The Germans, on the other hand, were somewhat less keen to record tank losses. Often tanks which were damaged far beyond combat capability but not completely destroyed and could technically be repaired were considered as still with the unit, even if there was no hope in actually repairing them. So a division that had 35 Tigers still with the unit might only actually have 12 capable of fighting, but they'd still record themselves as having 35, hence why the numbers seem so staggeringly against the Allies. Though to be fair, it wasn't just Tigers that were doing this. The 9th SS famously arrived in Normandy on June the 28th with over 70 Panther tanks, but by July, the 7th had just 19, with only 6 ever recorded as being lost. And by the time they'd fallen back to Holland in August, they had somewhere between 10 and 0. Again, with absolutely no recorded losses.
Schrodinger's
This is why
Panther.
when someone says, "Oh, I'm a numbers guy, the numbers tell me everything," you're an idiot. But anyway, I'm rambling. Let's put this rant to bed and ask the age-old question, can a Tiger take down an Abrams? Short
No.
answer, no. Long answer, no. Fuck. Michael Yeatman, Kurt Krispy Kreme, also Car Circus, choose your favorite comedy German tank commander, doesn't matter which one, and put one in a Tiger with their best crew against something like an Abrams. Doesn't really matter the quality of the Abrams crew, the Abrams wins every single time. I mean, maybe if you were to replace the Abrams crew with that lowest form of human intelligence, high-skilled gym teachers, then maybe they'd stand a chance, assuming you blinded them all first. Alright, maybe I'm not being 100% fair. Yes, it is possible for a Tiger to take down an Abrams. Any tank can indeed kill any other tank, or at least render it non-operable, given the right circumstances, of course. But let's say, even with years of training and months of prep time and auto carrier sitting behind you telling you exactly what to do, you'd have a higher chance of waking up tomorrow to find you'd won the lottery 6 times in a row, and then getting struck by lightning, and then winning the lottery a 7th time than you would defeating that Abrams. The Tiger was not all-powerful. It had its weaknesses and its flaws like any other tank. And regardless of any story you might have heard about the prowess of the legendary Tiger tank, especially concerning one Villers-Bocage story about a certain reality-bending tank commander, the Tiger had about as much overall impact on the war as pretty much anything else. But is it all bad? Well, surprisingly, in spite of its popularity as a discussion subject, a full objective analysis of the Tiger tank is quite rare, and even books and videos by so-called experts of armored warfare tend to be quite biased one way or the other, meaning you could argue for any position for or against the Tiger on almost any weird and wacky idea that crosses your mind and have a legion of sourceable material to quote, hence why the Wikipedia page for the Tiger is so inaccurate it formed the basis of a historian's drinking game, which I win every time. Bite me.
Part of this reason is that we, even in some academic circles, they know who they are, live in a popularity contest. History is a niche subject. Even in the broad and popular subjects like the Second World War, celebrity professors, lecturers, and those considered top experts in their field are all based on who has sold the most books, who has the most students, who has worked at the most prestigious universities, or as is becoming more common, who has the most subscribers. In order to sell books or to get those subscribers, one must tackle the big issues, the controversies, the popular subjects, the ones that will draw in the most crowds. And the Tiger Tank, well, that's your roller coaster at the fun fair. That's your top billed celebrity whose face is plastered all over your movie poster. Doing a book or a documentary or even a YouTube video on the Tiger Tank is almost guaranteed views. And naturally, your view is going to be biased one way or the other, depending on which crowd you are appealing to. Now focus on its potential power and combat performance as a singular unit versus the lesser tanks of the Allies if you're appealing to the Veribus or everyone's dad, or the focus on it as an economic black hole, an overcomplicated expensive machine that in spite of its much hyped prowess achieved very little, and whose costs of manufacturing may have even cost Hitler the war, depending on which school of thought you follow. That's an argument I'm not going to get into, because it's stupid. But, says Spicy Burrito 69, top poster on www.daddyhitler, serious discussion only.cock, you did that with the T-34. You leapt on a controversial topic review and you pandered to an audience that shuts up. To be fair, I didn't expect that video to blow up in the way that it did, and when I made that video I had less than 1,000 subscribers. And now my most viewed video on the channel is one I had to rush somewhat because I'd just gotten back from visiting a sick family member overseas. I was physically exhausted and suffering from both depression and an ear infection, and I think it shows. The aspect ratio is bugged, the sound levels are wonky, and I'm constantly slurring my words. Fun. But that video does offer us insight into one thing, and that is just how awful people's knowledge in armored warfare really is. People talk as if tanks are the only thing on the battlefield, and that the quality and numbers of said tanks are the defining factor in the outcome of the battle. Hence people's tendency to judge a tank based on how well it can take down other tanks, with that wonderful nugget of stupid arguments. Numbers matter in a war. But I digress. Self-proclaimed armor warfare experts and historians on the Second World War, especially tank historians, will often argue over specifics, gun type, shell quality, engine horsepower, track width, as if these are the defining traits on how a tank operates in combat, but choose to ignore things like crew comfort, how easy it is to get the shells from the ammunition box and into the gun, how easy it is to see the battle from inside the tank, or even how easy it is to get out of the tank if it's on fire, things that are generally more important on a battlefield and to the overall combat effectiveness of that vehicle than almost anything else. Probably because those things are not so easily Googled. I mean, yes, it helps if you have a better gun than your enemy. It helps if you have thicker armor and you can move just a little bit faster. But if you can't see your enemy because your sights are terrible, if you can't reload fast enough because the breech is in a weird place, or your gunner has to take his eyes off the sights or duck out of the turret in order to grab a shell, then honestly, it doesn't really matter how good anything else is. You can sit there and you can name me as many different T-34 variants as you want and go over the gradual improvements each one made to the design, but the reality is the major factors which contributed to the T-34 performing poorly as a tank were never fixed in any variant. It didn't matter how big the gun got, or if they changed to the better filters, or even if there was a slope on the side to knock the track pin back into place, which you all only know about because the Chieftain mentioned it in the video once, and that's not a World War II model T-34. The things that really mattered, the things that the crew needed to perform effectively, sights, ergonomics, comfort, were never fixed in any variant of the T-34. The crew of the T-34 were not going to survive combat any better because their tank had the improved cyclone filters installed. I actually love how everyone was spewing all over the comments about how I don't know that pressed and rolled steel is better than cast, blah 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 blah, and then someone asked the Chieftain to confirm it and he basically agreed with me. I'll reiterate. Shut up. Historians know better than you. So where does that leave us and our humble little Tiger tank? Well, firstly, we need to understand that the views of many who study tanks is typically wrong. I could do as I did with the T-34, go over every aspect of the tank and explain why it sucked, and honestly, that would be the easiest thing to do. The 88mm, for example, not as good as you think it is. The Tiger's armor, comparatively thin when considering tanks of 1944, nor is it particularly well angled. The oil tanks were prone to leakage, the engine needed to be turned over every hour or so as trying to move the tank from a cold start had a good chance of snapping the transmission, and so on and so forth. But as we've just learned, there's a lot more to a tank's performance than just simply naming the stuff it has. Let me give you an example. Let's pick on the 88mm for a while, because yeah, we need to have that discussion at some point. The 88mm gave the Tiger an advantage in range, but that advantage was pointless if the tank never fought at that range. For example, in France, during and after D-Day, where the vast hedgerows of the French countryside meant Allied and Axis tanks were often facing off against each other at sometimes point-blank range, then that massive gun became something of a disadvantage. An advantage
it gets
in range
caught in everything
is only
because
an
of the
advantage in
length.
the ideal circumstances you expect your tank to fight in. And in the chaos of war, ideal or even favorable circumstances almost never happen, save for in exceptionally rare circumstances. For example, our humble little Crusader tank was never designed to fight in the desert, but the sand and dust of North Africa showed the tank to have numerous design flaws that would have been irrelevant had the tank fought in temperate Europe, and probably never mentioned or even known about. So we could argue that the 88mm of the Tiger is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on which audience we want to appeal to, but the reality was, it just didn't matter. What mattered was how the tank performed in battle, if or not the design or even the construction impeded the performance of the tank or not. And well, with the consideration to the Tiger, the design was, and I hate to admit this, rather quite good.
Okay.
I know.
Let's see where he goes with this.
Fine, it's not the answer you were expecting, but seriously, from the ergonomics to the comfort of the crew to simple things like the sights just having a rain guard to prevent mud and water or rain from obscuring the gun sights, which is pretty handy if you're fighting in a muddy field in the rain, to just having a radio that allowed the crew to talk to each other, the commander to overrule everyone else talking when he had orders to give out, or even just communicate with other tanks or vehicles around them. It had seats for all the crew, multiple periscopes covering almost every arc, manual overrides for the electric motor turret. I mean, even that turret had multiple settings, allowing you to make smaller movements to more precisely aim. It had good wide tracks, and its suspension, much ridiculed for how difficult it was to change a wheel, gave it pretty decent ground pressure, allowing it to remain fairly agile over rough and muddy ground. The turret interior was also well ventilated, and most things the crew would need were often highlighted in brightly colored paint, meaning even if smoke was filling the fighting compartment, you could still quickly find the gas masks, the breathing tubes, or even just the hatches to get out. And at the driver's compartment at the front, rather than a series of complicated levers, a steering wheel, foot pedals for the clutch, the brake, and even a rudimentary cruise control system, all of which would seem rather familiar to someone with a period car, meaning if you could drive a car in 1940s Germany, you could drive a Tiger. All this meant that when it was in combat, the Tiger would perform quite well. Not because the engine was reliable, not because the gun was powerful, or even because it was fast and had good armor, but because the crew could operate with the tank as opposed to against it. The Tiger's crew had a machine which complemented them. They weren't constantly fighting against stupid designs or manufacturing oversights, and this allowed them more than anything else that the Tiger had to operate beyond what could be realistically expected of them, had they been in any other tank. Much has been written of the elite status of the Tiger crews, but this is in itself something of a myth. Tiger crews were typically better trained and better favored politically, but statistically were not really better than any other crews of any other tanks. What's most interesting is when a Tiger's crew was forced to use a different tank, say a Panzer IV, their performance degraded significantly with bitter few exceptions. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The Tiger was a tank restricted by the technology of the time. The MG-34 was prone to jamming so often that they were hardly ever used. The electronic system was particularly fragile and known to go down if the tank got jolted around too much. There are stories of shots hitting the Tiger and disabling the electronic system, even if the armor wasn't penetrated. And the engine vents, which had to be huge and well spaced to allow for that massive engine to breathe, were not good at keeping things like sand and mud out of the engine compartment, causing it to be caked in mud and overheat, meaning that during the tougher seasons, the entire compartment would have to be regularly cleaned out. This meant that without electronics, an overheating engine, and no machine guns, in spite of being well-angled, firing at range with an expert crew on board, the Tiger's biggest weakness was not another tank, but 2 guys, a can of petrol, a blanket, and a lighter. Or in the case of the Eastern Front, 2 Russian teenagers and a log. Of course, armor experts and enthusiasts often don't take things into consideration like infantry when discussing their favorite vehicles. Now, you'd be wrong to think that this is where the confusion for most comes in, that any of these things, both the good and the bad, were unique to the Tiger. British and French and later American vehicles all had rain guards. British tanks had multiple speed turret traversers and a machine gun that would jam frequently, or were otherwise useless to even bother using. And the later American tanks had extremely good ergonomics and ammunition storage, and 2-way internal and external radio sets were a feature on the Char 2C, a French tank built at the end of the First World War. In terms of components individually, the Tiger does not represent any great leap forward in technology, which is why it becomes so easy to debunk the myth of its acclaimed technological superiority. But when this thing was first deployed, absolutely no tank in the world featured a combination of all these things. Russian tanks were a series of good ideas built badly with a number of half-baked ideas cobbled onto it and then removed later for cost effectiveness. British tanks remained a hodgepodge of different ideas designed to tackle different problems in exciting and challenging new ways, and the French tanks were, well, French.
Yeah.
The problem with early Allied tanks was that they were all built by different companies and different designers with little communication or collaboration between them. Both Britain and Russia could have easily taken a step back, look at what worked in a tank and what didn't, and combined all their experience and ideas into one vehicle. And in a way they eventually did, but their circumstances forced them to rush out what little designs they had, flaws and all. The Tiger, on the other hand, combined all the soft factors which had worked well in other designs, or had been tested on previous prototypes, into one solid vehicle. And while it had its problems, it is somewhat impressive that Germany was able to get its shit sorted out and design something like this in the very early stages of the war. So now we must ask ourselves the question, if it's so good, why is it so bad? Out of the 1,300 Tigers built, 7 survived the war. Only 1 is still in operation, and there is a reason for that. In spite of its higher than average performance in battles, where it failed was its overall tactical performance in a war. The tank was fast for its size, but it was not fast enough to respond to emergent threats or retreat when overwhelmed. Its reliability wasn't too problematic during a battle, but a severe issue on long marches or extended campaigns. The tank was fairly reliable, contrary to popular belief, but the sheer amount of maintenance each Tiger needed meant that each company of tanks had to be followed around everywhere by an equal number of engineer vehicles, fuel trucks, ammunition trucks, etc., meaning its operational capability outside of the initial assault was quite low.
And you miss 1 or 2 days of maintenance, and that's when things just start getting exponentially worse.
It needed long periods of downtime between use, so being in continued weeks-long battles was simply not an option. Which is why when the fighting was at its thickest, these things broke down constantly. Tigers were also so expensive and resource-intensive to build, both in terms of material and manpower, that Germany could just never quite field enough of them to make an impact. And when one was disabled, it was almost impossible to recover, requiring several of the larger engineer vehicles to tow it off the battlefield for repairs. And of course, it being Germany, there was something of a shortage of these engineering vehicles. Again, not something typically considered when people discuss their favorite tanks. But the ultimate problem was not the design of the tank itself, but in the concept of heavy tanks as a whole. Heavy tanks seem like a brilliant idea.
I remember that video.
Power, a war machine capable of overpowering anything it comes across, because if I have a tank on the battlefield, I need it to be the most powerful it can ever be. Which, if you're a child, is exciting. And in a world where tanks only fight other tanks, the theory is sound. But in reality, it's a disaster waiting to happen. The biggest problem with the Tiger and with heavy tanks and related superweapons as a whole is they tend to be quite rare, and their use is almost exclusively held for special operations and important or highly significant battles. This means that your enemy can get something of an unfair advantage when it knows where they are. Let me put it like this. Let's say you're initiating a 3-pronged attack, forcing your enemy to split their forces defending 3 separate points. Now, 2 of these points are a distraction,
But your main force, though, the one that you're pinning all your hopes on, now that's got your top commander, that's got your elite crews with your heaviest tanks spearheading the assault. And now your enemy knows where to concentrate its fire. Sure, your other forces may push through and possibly win small battles here and there, but at the cost of all your best and most powerful units. This is the risk of any super weapon. It doesn't matter how powerful it gets. Your enemy is going to concentrate everything on taking it down, and they will likely succeed. And is that a cost you can really endure? Constantly wasting time and resources producing replacements for vehicles which ultimately achieve very little than be a bullet magnet distraction. And this was the Tiger's main problem. When one showed up, the Allies were pretty much at liberty to dictate how it was handled, and could, and probably would, throw everything they had at it, and there was little the Tiger could do to withstand that. The Allies didn't need a Thunderbolt or a Firefly running across all of France to deal with a Tiger anytime one showed up. Anything, absolutely anything they had could deal with one. In one famous incident shortly after D-Day, a Tiger on recon popped a hill to inspect where they thought an Allied advance might come from, and came face to face with 30 Sherman tanks, all of whom immediately opened fire. The Tiger was hit 12 times, and though none of these shots penetrated the armor, it knocked the electronics out, it caused the engine to catch fire, and the crew were forced to bail. And this is sadly the fate of almost every Tiger built. The Tiger represented a combination of great ideas that came close to creating a solid, brilliant tank, but it lacked refinement, and would continuously be hampered by the regime it was built to serve. Emphasis was always placed on everything being bigger and larger and more impressive, more armor, a bigger gun, built and painted to look impressive for the propaganda cameras. But for all the reputation of the equally revered King Tiger and Panther, both, in my own opinion, represent a step backwards in tank design. Both were designed to solve problems that had already been solved. Both were designed to take advantage of exotic materials that Germany either had little or no access to, and thus were hampered by shortcuts and workarounds in their design. Neither tank would refine the design of the Tiger or really go on to solve many of the problems that arose during its service, and both would be crippled by serious design flaws and oversights, many of which would require expensive overhauls or redesigns to fix, and some of which would just never be fixed at all. For all the brilliance in its design, the Tiger would never achieve the same level of combat capability as the Sherman. The Americans would build the Sherman based not only on their own experiences, but the experiences of both the French and the British, making it a tank that was, for one of the first times on the Allied side, something that was built on the experiences of what worked and what didn't, without relying on the eccentricities of the design team, as well as a generous amount of trial and error. Granted, the technical capabilities of the Sherman may now be somewhat overhyped due to the somewhat overzealous correction of the World War II mythos in recent years, but I digress.
Yeah.
Tiger has had something of an unfair life. Post-war, it became the pseudo-celebrity of the tank world, and for years it was worshipped as such, becoming an icon that inspired hundreds of lazy writers to cash in on Tiger craze, selling books and documentaries and whatever that portrayed the Tiger as an invincible monster that terrified the Allies, and whose eventual defeat was down to the Nazis' overconfidence versus the pluckiness, brilliance, or heroics of the Allies. In more recent years, it has flipped. Having now realized the stories they were spoon-fed as children are bullshit, this new generation of amateur historians have grown to find that the fabled Tiger is not all it was dreamed to be, and thus any aspect of it becomes a myth to be debunked, as the narrative has changed to the overcorrection of the Tiger's actual performance, to which now any story of it sowing chaos behind the enemy lines is laughed out of the room, even if it is objectively true. At the end of the day, the Tiger is an early example of a tank, a product of 1940s technology, which in spite of many beliefs does not include laser guns and anti-gravity engines. It is, by all accounts, an impressive vehicle by design, though not suited for mass production, especially at the hands of a regime to which the phrase German engineering meant inefficiency through overcomplication and interdepartmental rivalry, and automation meant get the slaves to do it. The Tiger is nowhere near the weapon it is typically hyped up to be by the common or garden variable, but it is also not as bad as the modern day argument would have you believe. It's rather like meeting your favorite celebrity in real life, brilliant from a distance, but not someone you'd want to be stuck in an elevator with. Anyway, I'm very drunk and also very unwell. My name's Lazerpig, and this has been a video.
Well, what do you know? Another very good video from Laser. And on the topic of the tiger, what do you know? It's a thing that has both good and bad characteristics about it. I will fully admit, I like the aesthetics of like 40s and 50s machines a lot better than modern ones. I'm not a fan of, sharp corners and the obscenely clean lines. I like that little bit of ruggedness, or that little bit of, I don't know what you call it, that little bit of, we're still trying to figure things out a little bit. But at the same time, I fully understand why it's gone that way. Technology advances, things have to change because technology advances. And even if it was overhyped, and maybe still is a little overhyped, but in the opposite direction, I like the Tiger tank because it's big, it's boxy, it's stupid, and it's wonderful. It's the same reason why I like the Tog too. And again, whichever corner it's in, I'm forgetting. But the Deus Ex Human Revolution video coming out the same day this is coming out. Come and watch it if that's your thing. But with all that said, I hope you guys liked. And if you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.